and saw your entire life story written inside. Every secret you've buried, every heartbreak you've suffered, every dream you've never told a soul. That's exactly what happened to Omotara Bamidele, a young woman who thought she was just another forgotten face in Lagos. But inside those pages, she discovered something terrifying. The book didn't just know her past. It was already writing her future. And what it revealed would drag her into the world of billionaires, betrayals, and a destiny that threatened to consume everything she loved. Tonight, her story begins, and you won't believe how it ends. Rain hammered Lagos like 1,000 impatient fingers as Omotara Bamidele sprinted beneath corrugated eaves, shoes slapping through mirror-black puddles. She was a magazine intern paid in promises and bus fare, the kind of girl who carried ideas in a frayed tote and hunger in her eyes. When thunder broke the sky open, she ducked into a forgotten library on Tokunbo Street, the one old women called haunted, not by ghosts, but by stories that refused to die. Inside, the air smelled of wet dust and aging paper, a perfume of memory. Neon coughed in the ceiling as PHCN teased the lights. Flicker, flicker, darkness, flicker. Between towering stacks, a low table displayed donations nobody wanted. That was where she saw it. A leather-bound volume the color of dried cola nut, its spine uncracked, its title stamped in quiet gold, The Unwritten Truths of Omotara Bamidele. Her own name, whole and impossible, gleamed at her like an accusation. Heat rose to her cheeks, as if someone had called her out in a crowded danfo. She checked the room, only a snoring guard at the entrance, his cap tipped over his eyes, a girl in braids tracing words with a finger, an elderly man asleep over a newspaper. No one looked at her. No one could have arranged this. With trembling hands, she opened the cover, half expecting a library card, a prank, some mundane answer that could rescue her from wonder. Instead, a first page burned with ink already drying. The sentences were intimate, unornamented, and undeniable. You plucked stones from a gutter to play suey, because you could not afford rubber bands. You hid your jotter under the mattress when the landlord's wife mocked your dreams. You cried the night your brother died. The words were not quotation, but possession, a second-person grip that tightened around her throat, turning breath into a careful thing she had to remember. Lightning stitched the windows white. Fluorescence fluttered, then stilled, bathing the aisles in a dim aquarium glow. The library seemed to inhale, dust lifted in motes like tiny ghosts of paper. Omotara ran her fingers down the margin and felt something improbable. The faintest drum of a heartbeat, as if the book were syncing itself to her pulse. She yanked her hand back, then laughed too loudly, the sound swallowed by rows of spines that did not laugh with her. She turned another page, and the room blurred to the texture of yesterday. You tasted rain when you licked the condensation off the freezer in Mama Afusat's shop. You learned to plait your own hair, because braiders were a luxury. You stopped telling stories when Kaode said they were childish. Each line snagged a thread in her chest and pulled. Wonder warred with fury. How dare a stranger archive her aches, make a museum of things she survived by hiding? At the bottom of the page, a sentence appeared between blinks, letters knitting themselves from nothing, as though summoned by her outrage. Do not turn beyond the 7th chapter, or your ending will be sealed. The directive sat there, neat and clinical, ruthless in its calm. She glanced at the table of contents. There were 12 chapters, the last one coyly untitled. A laugh caught in her throat. Who threatens a reader in a public library at noon? She checked the librarian's desk. empty now, a mug ring drying like a solar eclipse. Somewhere a generator coughed to life. She slid the book into her tote with the care of a thief and the entitlement of someone reclaiming what had been stolen. Later, she told herself. Later, when she could sit on her thin mattress in Yaba, when the noise of generators and gossip would drown her thoughts, she would read everything and decide whether to obey. Outside, the storm softened to a silver curtain, the city rinsed and reflective. She pictured the day ahead, the editor who loved sending her for coffee, the inbox full of bounced pitches, the far-off dream of writing stories that could pay a landlord and hush a stomach. Somewhere in the same city, she knew, people were buying paintings for the price of apartments, ordering flights with a finger, living inside glass houses that kissed the clouds. None of them knew her name. Until now, apparently, a book did. She braced the tote on her shoulder and stepped into the pale afternoon, gutters gurgling, vendors pulling tarps from their wares like magicians revealing tired tricks. The pavement steamed. A BRT exhaled, impatient. She took 3 steps and felt it, a tug, small at first, then insistent, as if the bag had swallowed a stone. She adjusted the strap. The tug deepened. Heat pricked her neck. She paused beneath a jacaranda whose blossoms stuck to her sandals, opened the tote, and peered inside. The book lay there, innocent, yet the fabric bowed as though it held breath. The weight grew again, a slow, deliberate gravity. Omotara swallowed. Something inside those pages turned itself, without her hand, alive. The book did not wait for her permission. That night, in her small Yaba room that smelled faintly of kerosene and damp wood, Omotara lit a candle and opened the heavy volume again. The first flick of the flame caught the words, and she gasped. Her childhood unspooled across the page with merciless clarity, written as though memory itself had been transcribed. By invisible hands, you rose with the sun to help your mother fry a kara at the roadside stall, your hands raw from hot oil splattering. You watched her laugh with customers, though her laughter thinned each year, a tired veil for hunger. You learned to count change before you learned multiplication. Omotara's throat tightened. She could almost smell the fried beans clinging to her clothes, almost feel the coins sweating in her palm as impatient men barked orders. Then the next line cut deeper. Your father was a teacher who lost his voice long before he left the classroom. He carried chalk like a weapon, but the government's broken promises silenced him. He returned home each day with a newspaper folded tight, a bitterness tucked in his briefcase. She remembered the slumped shoulders, the sighs that seemed older than the man himself. She remembered the evenings when candlelight flickered across his lined face as he stared at unpaid bills, scribbling lesson notes as if teaching again in some invisible classroom. The pages refused mercy. You studied under candlelight, the shadows dancing on cracked walls. You pretended not to hear your mother cry at night when kerosene ran out, or when rent loomed. You envied children who did not measure time by PHCN outages, who did not eat akara for dinner 3 nights in a row. Omotara pressed her hand to her mouth. That envy had been her silent shame, a poison she never spoke aloud. Yet here it was, printed in perfect sentences, laid bare by a book that had no right to know. And then, the knife. You held your brother Abiola's hand as fever burned him, your mother running from chemist to chemist, begging. The hospital demanded deposits you did not have. You watched his chest still beneath a frayed blanket, and your childhood ended. Her hand trembled, candle wax spilling like tears down the brass holder. Abiola. The name carried weight she never dared lift anymore. She had locked him in memory's deepest room, but the book had keys to every door. She closed her eyes, letting the grief swell. An old wave she thought the years had tamed. The ink shifted as though it knew her breaking point. You dreamed of writing, of building a world where words could never be silenced by poverty. You hid your notebooks beneath the mattress because dreams felt like luxuries you could not afford to flaunt. You whispered stories to yourself, afraid someone would laugh. Omotara touched her tote where, hidden beneath folded clothes, her current journal lay. The book had not only unearthed what she had lived, it understood what she had longed for. Her heart pounded. It wasn't recording. No, it was feeling. Every line breathed with her. Every emotion mirrored her pulse. It was too precise, too intimate. She slammed it shut, but when she reopened it, new words shimmered as if freshly inked. What was taken from your bloodline will be returned in wealth. She froze. Bloodline? Returned? The phrasing was biblical, like a prophecy carved in scripture. Her family had never been wealthy. Her mother was still in Ibadan, frying akara in the same corner stall. There were no mansions, no legacies, no dynasties with her name etched in marble. Unless... She sat back, trying to remember whispers from childhood, fragments of stories told and quickly abandoned, a grandmother who once spoke of belonging to another house. Rumors of a betrayal that drove the family from its rightful standing. But whenever Omotara asked, her mother shut down the conversation with weary finality. "We are where we are," she always said. "Leave the past where it died." But this book insisted the past was not dead at all. Her eyes darted to the candle flame. Could it be true? Could her family once have had something stolen, erased, buried beneath decades of survival and silence? Her fingers hovered before she dared turn another page. The air in the room felt heavy, like unseen eyes watched from every corner. She flipped forward, half terrified, half desperate. The ink gleamed. A new name waited there. Chief Alade Oyeniran. Omotara frowned, whispering it aloud. The syllables tasted foreign and heavy. She had never heard of him before, yet the book placed his name in bold as though announcing a storm. Her skin prickled. Whoever this man was, he had something to do with the secret of her bloodline, something to do with what had been stolen. The candle sputtered. A gust rattled her window. Omotara stared at the name again, shivering at its power. The book had just connected her buried childhood to someone out there. Someone wealthy, someone powerful, someone she was destined to face. And she could feel it in her bones. This was only the beginning. The name lingered with her long after the candle had burned down to its stub. Chief Alade Oyeniran. It clung to her like perfume after a crowded bus ride. Unshakable, insistent, present even in dreams. By morning, Omotara could no longer resist. She opened her laptop, the one she prayed daily would not give up its ghost, and typed the name into a search bar. The internet yielded an avalanche. Chief Alade Oyeniran, reclusive billionaire, famed art collector, patron of endangered African heritage. Photographs showed a tall man with skin creased like fine leather, always in agbada, woven so intricately the threads looked like molten gold. He was based in Abuja, but his influence stretched far beyond Nigeria. Governments had sought his counsel on cultural preservation. Universities named halls after him. Rumors whispered that he had enough artifacts locked in private vaults to rival national museums. But what stunned Omotara was not his wealth, nor his aura of untouchable power. It was a brief line in his biography, buried in a cultural feature from over a decade ago. Born in Akinlabi village, Ogun State. Her breath caught. That was her grandmother's hometown, The dusty red earth place she had visited only twice in childhood, where goats roamed freely, and women spoke in proverbs that bent like riddles. Her grandmother had died when she was barely 10, but Omotara remembered her voice like wind through raffia, low, commanding, yet filled with sorrow. Could this be the connection the book hinted at? Her chest tightened. She needed answers. That weekend, Omotara traveled to Ibadan, carrying the book wrapped in old newspapers. Her mother was at the Akara stall, her face glistening from heat and oil. Omotara waited until evening when the house was quiet, the neighborhood children done chasing kites of nylon bags. Then she placed the book on the rickety table. Her mother froze, spat out a hiss, and whispered a prayer under her breath. "Where did you find this?" "In a library," Omotara said softly. "It knows everything about me, about us. And it mentioned Chief Oyeniran." Her mother's hand trembled as she reached for the book, but snatched it back as though it burned. Silence thickened. Finally she spoke. "Your grandmother, God rest her soul, was once promised to Oyenirans' father. It was an agreement between families, but something happened, something that brought shame. She was cast out, left to fend for herself. She never spoke of it fully. All she said was that she lost more than love that day. She lost her place in history." The revelation cracked open something inside Omotara. The book was not simply a trick of fate or imagination. It was stitching together a buried legacy, threading her existence into a dynasty she never knew she was tied to. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Her mother's eyes glistened. "Because what good is a story that can only remind you of what you'll never have? We are Bamidele. We survived by forgetting." But Omotara could not forget. Not anymore. That night, in her old room in Ibadan, she reopened the book. The ink shifted again, as if impatient with her hesitation. The Oyeniran family carries what belongs to you. A legacy silenced must one day speak. Her pulse raced. What could they possibly hold that belonged to her bloodline? A property deed, wealth, a secret inheritance, or something less tangible, more dangerous? Curiosity dug its claws into her, until obsession was the only word for it. She began researching every article, every gossip column, every whisper tied to the Oyenirans. Their empire was not only built on art, but on investments in real estate, oil, and technology. They were power personified, a dynasty with walls so high, outsiders rarely glimpsed what lay within. Yet somehow, she was connected. By morning, she had made a decision. If fate had thrown her name into this story, she would not sit on the sidelines. She applied for a prestigious cultural fellowship in Abuja, one that promised access to elite circles. On the surface, it was about career advancement. In truth, it was her Trojan horse, her way of moving closer to the Oyeniran world. Each dawn, the book pulsed with fresh ink, updating itself like a living diary. It anticipated choices she hadn't yet made, the train she would miss, the stranger she would bump into, the questions she would be too afraid to ask, but would ask anyway. It felt less like reading and more like being read. Omotara began to wonder if her willpower mattered at all. Was she charting a path, or was she only stepping into footprints already inked? One night, unable to resist, she opened the book before sleep. The page that greeted her was stark, urgent. "You will meet the heir of Oyeniran tomorrow, and your fates will tangle like fire." The words glowed faintly, as though alive. Omotara sat frozen, the silence of the night pressing against her ears. She knew then that her life was no longer her own. Tomorrow would change everything. The gallery pulsed with soft jazz and the low hum of Abuja's elite exchanging calculated laughter. Polished marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, while canvases of modern African art hung like fragments of a dream. Omotara felt painfully out of place in her borrowed dress, her fellowship badge swinging nervously at her chest. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, clutching her tote with the cursed book inside, its presence a steady weight against her hip. Then she saw him, Damilola Oyeniran. He stood near a Benenwonwu sculpture, his tall frame anchored with effortless confidence. His suit was tailored midnight, his tie abandoned, his presence magnetic. The air seemed to bend toward him, as though the room recognized power when it walked in. Women hovered nearby like moths, orbiting a flame, yet he remained aloof, hands clasped behind him, his gaze scanning the art with the cold calculation of a man who saw paintings not only as beauty, but as assets. Omotara's pulse quickened. She had seen his face in glossy magazines, but in person it was different, striking, too perfect to be softened by wealth. His eyes were deep-set, unreadable, the kind that invited curiosity, yet punished intrusion. She should have looked away, but the book had warned her. You will meet the heir of Oyeniran tomorrow, and your fates will tangle like fire. And then it happened. He turned, their eyes locked. The moment stretched, brittle and electric. She opened her mouth to excuse herself, to retreat. But before she could, words carved themselves across her mind, word for word, from the cursed book. "I haven't seen you here before," he said, his voice low, steady, almost testing. Her lips parted in shock. A second later, the exact words spilled from his mouth. "I haven't seen you here before." Omotara's heart lurched. "I'm new," she managed, trying to disguise the tremor in her voice with a polite smile. He studied her, head tilted slightly, as though cataloging her. "You're not like the others." It wasn't a compliment so much as an observation, but something about his tone unsettled her. Still she straightened, forcing a boldness she didn't feel. "Maybe you don't look hard enough." For the first time, a flicker of something, amusement, curiosity, touched his expression. Sharp tongue, refreshing. Their conversation slid between art and business, light yet edged, like two fencers testing each other's reflexes. Every time Omotara spoke, he seemed to lean in slightly, not because of volume, but because her words intrigued him. She, in turn, felt torn, drawn to his confidence, unnerved by his silence. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. He felt familiar, like a shadow she had seen before but never named. Her mind kept circling the thought. Had their families crossed more deeply than she realized? The book inside her tote seemed to hum against her body, reminding her it was always one step ahead. She resisted the urge to open it then and there, terrified she would see the next line of their conversation before he even spoke. "Tell me," Damilola said, his voice softer now. "What does someone like you really want in a place like this?" Her answer came before she could stop it, too raw. A chance to be seen. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then something shifted in his eyes. He recognized it, not just her words, but the truth beneath them, a hunger, a determination, a wound. Most women around him offered beauty, charm, strategy. Omotara offered something rarer, honesty, wrapped in defiance. It disarmed him, and yet she couldn't shake the suspicion pressing at her chest, that he knew something about her family, that he wasn't simply curious about a new face, but about her. His questions were casual, but precise, grazing close to roots she didn't even understand herself. When their conversation ended, it was not with closure, but with tension, the kind that hummed beneath the skin long after words faded. Later that night, In her fellowship accommodation, Omotara sat cross-legged on her bed, the cursed book open across her lap. She should not have read it. She should have burned it, buried it, abandoned it in the deepest gutter of Lagos. But she could not resist. The words scrawled themselves as if in real time. His love will crown you, but his empire will bury you. The ink pulsed, dark and final. Omotara dropped the book, her chest tightening. She pressed her palms to her temples. She had walked into fire, and the flames had already claimed her name. The Oyeniran mansion rose from the earth like a glass cathedral, its reflective walls catching the Abuja sun and casting it back in fragments of brilliance. Gates, taller than most houses, parted for sleek cars and guests whose laughter carried the weight of money. Omotara stepped into this world of polished marble and perfumed air with the hesitation of someone who knew she did not belong, her thrift store dress a quiet rebellion against gowns that shimmered like spilled jewels. Damilola walked beside her, his stride calm, his presence commanding. "You'll get used to it," he murmured, as though the sight of infinity pools and gold leaf ceilings were nothing more than background noise. But Omotara's chest tightened. She had grown up where walls peeled from damp, where silence belonged only to power outages. Now she stood in a mansion whose corridors could swallow her entire neighborhood. Inside, the house was a museum of Africa's stolen beauty reclaimed. Bronze heads from Benin, deer cloths framed as art, sculptures that seemed to breathe under spotlights. The air smelled faintly of oud and new money. Every corner whispered wealth, permanence, legacy. At dinner, Omotara sat stiffly as crystal clinked and courses arrived like edible works of art. Damilola introduced her simply, a friend. The word felt both protective and precarious. His family glanced at her with polite curiosity, but one pair of eyes sliced sharper than the rest, Amara's. Amara Okwudili was elegance weaponized, a politician's daughter, heiress to influence, and Damilola's long-publicized fiancé. She sat across the table, her gown the color of midnight, her smile sharp enough to cut. "A friend?" she repeated, her voice smooth, her gaze appraising Omotara as though she were a puzzle to be solved and discarded. Omotara held her fork too tightly, forcing her lips into a smile. Inside, her tote weighed against her side, the cursed book, hidden but never silent. That night, when she opened it in her fellowship room, the words on the page were chilling. Tomorrow at dinner, Amara will lean forward and ask, "Do you think you belong here, Miss Bamidele?" Her stomach dropped. The next evening it happened exactly as written, same smile, same tone. Omotara tested the book, daring to resist its script. Instead of answering with the timid denial the book had predicted, she said boldly, "Belonging is not given, it's claimed." But the result was the same. Amara smirked, leaned back, and whispered something in Damilola's ear. A ripple of discomfort spread across the table. The script had not been broken. It had only bent to the same end. Panic grew inside Omotara. Was the book controlling her choices, or merely revealing a future no one could escape? Was she a puppet, or a prisoner of inevitability? The more she resisted, the more it mocked her. Whole conversations appeared hours before they happened, and no matter what she tried, the outcomes remained identical. The book wasn't just documenting her life, it was dictating it. And Amara knew. If not about the book itself, then about Omotara's intrusion into this world. The politician's daughter moved with the confidence of someone who had never been denied, her eyes flashing with the certainty of ownership. "He's mine," her gaze said without words, every time she leaned toward Damilola. One evening after a party in Ikoyi, Amara cornered Omotara on the terrace. "I don't know where you crawled from," she said, her perfume thick and suffocating, "but you'll regret staying. The Oyenirans don't forgive trespassers, and I don't share." The book confirmed it the next morning. One woman's ambition will erase another's name. Omotara closed it with shaking hands, her mind spiraling. Whose name? Amara's or hers? Was she destined to be erased, swallowed by a history she barely understood? Yet fate seemed determined to peel back secrets faster than she could hide from them. During another visit to the Oyeniran mansion, wandering through corridors lined with portraits and relics, Omotara paused in front of a photograph tucked between larger frames. It was faded, sepia-toned, almost overlooked. Her breath caught as her eyes focused. There, in the grainy image, stood Chief Alade Oyeniran's father, broad-shouldered, regal, commanding. Beside him was a young woman with familiar eyes, the same sharp chin, the same stubborn tilt of head Omotara saw in the mirror every morning. Her grandmother. The room spun. Her tote bag thudded to the polished floor, the cursed book inside stirring as if it knew its secret had just been unearthed. Omotara whispered to herself, voice trembling. She was here. She belonged here. And for the first time, she realized, she wasn't just walking into power. She was walking back into a story her family had been exiled from. But why had they been erased? And why did the book want her to return? The answers would not wait. The war did not begin with swords or shouting. It began with smiles. Amara's smile, to be precise. The kind that dripped sugar on the surface but cut like glass underneath. At every gathering, every gala, every auction where the Oyenirans paraded their influence, Amara wielded her charm like a dagger. She would place a hand on Damilola's arm just as Omotara approached, lean in to whisper jokes that drew his reluctant smile, then glance sideways at Omotara with eyes full of triumph. It was subtle, calculated, an art form of humiliation designed to remind Omotara that she was an intruder. The book, however, refused to let her doubt the truth of what she saw. Late at night, when she opened its cursed pages, it recorded not only her fears but Amara's heart. She fears replacement more than loneliness. She sharpens her beauty because she cannot sharpen her spirit. Omotara stared at those lines, in horror. The book did not merely chronicle her, it invaded others, peeling back insecurities and strategies like stolen diaries. It knew Amara's venom before it touched her skin, and the venom flowed. Amara whispered rumors into society ears, painting Omotara as an opportunist. At dinners, she would praise Omotara faintly. "You're so brave to dream this big with so little." Her tone soaked in condescension. At charity events, she would point out Omotara's humble background with feigned admiration, turning generosity into insult. Damilola saw it, but he was bound by more than affection. He was bound by duty. His family had arranged his engagement to Amara years before. Marriage meant to seal political alliances and secure legacy. Breaking it would ignite scandal, perhaps fracture the Oyeniran Empire. Yet his gaze lingered on Omotara longer than it should. His words softened when he spoke to her, his silences heavy with unspoken longing. Omotara felt the echo of her grandmother's story tightening around her neck. History was replaying itself, a forbidden love within the Oyeniran dynasty, a woman fighting shadows larger than herself. Would she too be cast out? Would her name vanish like her grandmother's, scrubbed from memory? The book did not comfort her. Its pages grew darker, the ink heavier, as though dipped in shadows. Your name trembles on the edge of erasure, it warned. One crown cannot rise while another remains. Desperate, Omotara tried to destroy it. She lit a candle and pressed the flame to the corner of its page, but the fire recoiled, sputtering out like a child denied sweet. She soaked a page in water. By morning the words had dried themselves, reappearing clearer than before. She even tore one sheet into shreds, scattering the pieces out the window. By dawn, the page was whole again, nestled smugly between its siblings. The book was indestructible. Worse, it seemed to enjoy resisting her. At a cocktail event on Banana Island, Amara finally cornered her away from the glittering chandeliers and champagne flutes. Her gown was white, sharp as a blade, and her voice a whisper cold enough to freeze. "You think this is a fairy tale?" Amara said. "That you can waltz into a dynasty and take what you please? The Oyenirans don't forgive trespassers. You will learn that." Omotara swallowed hard, refusing to show fear. "Maybe your fear should not be me, but the truth you don't want uncovered." Amara's eyes narrowed, a flash of something raw. Panic, maybe, or rage. Then the smile returned, polished and cruel. "Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts. Crowns are not shared. Someone always loses." That night, Omotara lay awake, the city lights bleeding into her room. The book sat on her bedside like a predator waiting for her to blink. She considered ignoring it, but temptation gnawed at her. She opened it slowly, bracing herself. The words were already waiting, larger than usual, bold and final. "In 7 days, one crown will fall." Her blood ran cold. Which crown? Amara's glittering one, built on privilege and politics, or her own fragile one made of dreams, defiance, and a legacy clawing its way back from silence? 7 days. Her story had just declared war. 7 days. The prophecy clung to Omotara like damp air, refusing to release her even in sleep. Each morning, she awoke with the weight of a countdown pressing into her chest, the cursed book resting on her bedside like a silent judge. It had marked her destiny with a sentence too sharp to forget. In 7 days, one crown will fall. Day 1 brought whispers. Her articles at the fellowship, once praised for their insight, suddenly returned with harsh criticism. A senior colleague accused her of plagiarism, a charge so absurd it almost made her laugh, until the editor warned her that rumors stick faster than truth. That night, she opened the book and found nothing. Its pages were blank, the silence louder than any prophecy. Day 2 brought sabotage. At an exhibition, where she had been tasked with curating pieces, several artworks she arranged were mysteriously misplaced. Amara arrived at the event in a gown of emerald silk, smiling as guests murmured about incompetence and inexperience. Omotara's hands shook, but she kept her composure, pretending she did not hear. The book that night bled red ink across its pages, sentences smudged and angry, as though written in fury she could not interpret. Day 3 cracked her resolve. Damilola found her on the mansion's balcony, staring out at the Abuja skyline lit like a field of diamonds. His voice was soft but steady. "I can't pretend anymore. Omotara, I care for you." The words should have warmed her, but they filled her with dread. She remembered her grandmother's exile, remembered the book's endless warnings. Was she doomed to repeat history, stealing affection from a dynasty that would never truly embrace her? "I'm not Amara," she whispered. "That's exactly why," Damilola replied, his gaze fierce with honesty. Her heart thundered, but guilt gnawed at its edges. Was she tearing apart dynasties with her choices, or was destiny manipulating her into this dangerous entanglement? Day 4 deepened the fear. The book refused order, its pages changing whenever her emotions shifted. When she cried, it bled ink. When she laughed, rare as that was, it glowed faintly, as though mocking her joy. She slammed it shut, whispering, "Stop listening to me." But the next time she opened it, a line appeared instantly. "We hear what you cannot silence." Day 5, delivered intervention. Family elders summoned Damilola into a private chamber during a dinner. Omotara caught fragments of conversation outside the heavy doors. Her name, whispered like a curse, followed by words like ruin, danger, and tradition. When he emerged, his face was carved from stone, his jaw clenched, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "They don't decide for me," he said. Yet the strain in his voice betrayed the truth. Their disapproval was a blade hanging over them both. Day 6 stripped her further. A gossip blog leaked photographs of her with Damilola, carefully framed to suggest intimacy beyond what had yet transpired. The comments online were ruthless, accusations of gold-digging, mockery of her humble roots. "From a Kara stall to billionaire's bed," one headline sneered. Omotara sat alone in her fellowship quarters, phone buzzing with pings of mockery, while the book pulsed faintly beside her, as if savoring the chaos it had foretold. By now she felt utterly isolated. Who could she tell about the cursed volume that anticipated betrayal before it arrived, that revealed insecurities she had never spoken aloud? Not her mother, still clinging to silence. Not Damilola, who bore enough weight already, and certainly not anyone in this glittering world that thrived on secrets. Day 7 arrived like a storm disguised as calm. She awoke to silence, the book lying closed on her bedside. No new words, no red ink, just stillness. She carried it with her all day, the weight familiar now, almost part of her body. At gatherings, she felt Amara's eyes like daggers, Damilola's loyalty like fire, and the family's disapproval like stone. She drifted through the hours as though walking across a tightrope, each breath a gamble. That night, when the mansion slept and Abuha's city lights hummed like restless stars, she opened the book for what felt like judgment. The pages moved of their own accord, flipping faster than her eyes could follow, words blurring into storms of ink. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The book closed itself, the leather covers snapping together like jaws. She reached for it, but it would not yield. It locked tight, humming faintly, as though something inside had awakened. And then the glow, soft at first, then brighter, spilling through the cracks of the pages like fire caged in glass. Omotara stumbled back, her breath sharp in her throat. The book was no longer waiting for her to read. It was preparing to decide. The book's glow haunted Omotara for days. She carried it like a curse, heavy with silence, locked as if daring her to defy it. By the 4th night, she could no longer endure its weight. The answers were not in Damilola's eyes, not in Amara's venom, not in the whispers of society. They were in the place where it all began, the forgotten library on Tokunbo Street. The rain had returned, almost as though the sky remembered that first night. Omotara hurried through puddles and mud, clutching the tote, until the library's cracked facade appeared like an old conspirator. Inside, the air was colder, the silence sharper. The old librarian, a woman with silver braids tucked beneath a faded scarf, looked up as though she had been waiting. "You've come back," the woman said, her voice low, almost reverent. Omotara set the book on the desk, her hands trembling. "What is this? Why me?" The librarian's eyes softened, sorrow threading through them. "Some stories are not written. They are kept. Follow me." She led Omotara past aisles of forgotten novels and reference texts, toward a narrow door half hidden by shelves. With a key that looked older than the building itself, she unlocked it. The hinges groaned, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into shadows. "Where are we going?" Omotara whispered. "To where the fates wait," the librarian replied. The stairs ended in a vast chamber, lit by lanterns that glowed without flame. The air smelled of ink and age. And there, stretching farther than her eyes could follow, were shelves upon shelves of books, thousands, tens of thousands, each one bound in the same leather as hers, each bearing a name embossed on its spine. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, reading names she did not know. Ordinary names, powerful names, forgotten names, people alive, people long gone. "These are unwritten fates," the librarian said. "Lives recorded, paths traced, choices weighed. Some books end before they should, others remain blank, a few never stop writing." Omotara's fingers trembled as she moved along the shelves. Then she froze. There it was. Omotara Bamidele, her grandmother's book. She pulled it free. The cover was cracked, fragile. She opened it, flipping through blank pages until her breath caught at a date. The very year her grandmother had been cast out of the Oyeniran family's orbit. Up until then, there were words. Afterward, nothing. Just silence. Omotara's throat tightened. Her grandmother's story hadn't ended because she chose silence. It had been cut short, erased. Someone had deliberately closed the book. Tears pricked her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would anyone do this?" The librarian sighed. "Some families silence what threatens their crowns. Not every legacy is meant to bloom." Omotara clutched the book to her chest, fury mingling with grief. Her grandmother had not simply been forgotten. She had been stolen from history. The Bamidele name was not a story of poverty alone. It was a story of deliberate interruption. She looked around the chamber, her pulse racing. Who writes these? Who decides? "That," the librarian said softly, "is the question none of us dare answer. Some say it is a society older than the kingdoms. Others say it is simply human hands, guided by power. But none of us truly know." Omotara felt the walls closing in, the shelves pressing against her. She was chosen, yes, but chosen into what? A system of control masquerading as destiny, a prison of ink and expectation. Her tote shifted against her hip, heavy with her own cursed volume. She pulled it out, laying it beside her grandmother's book. Unlike the others, it pulsed faintly, alive. The librarian gasped. "Yours is still writing." Omotara opened it with trembling hands. The pages moved on their own, filling themselves with fresh lines, chronicling her descent into this very chamber. No other book on these shelves moved. No other book bled into the present. Only hers. Her chest rose and fell in jagged breaths. She was not simply living a story. She was the continuation of one that had been silenced. The Bamidele crown had been stripped from her grandmother, and now the book demanded repayment through her. Her fingers hovered over her grandmother's unfinished volume. Slowly she flipped to the last blank page, and then she froze. A line shimmered into existence before her eyes, letters crawling across the paper like ants. "You are the continuation." Her knees weakened. The chamber seemed to hum, the lanterns flickering as though bowing to her. The truth pressed down with crushing weight. She was not here to read her story. She was here to finish it. And the cost would be everything. Omotara stood before her reflection, the city lights of Abuja glowing through the window like scattered fireflies. For days, she had felt the prophecy pressing against her ribs, threatening to suffocate her with its inevitability. But tonight she felt something new, defiance. She would no longer cower before the ink. She turned toward Damilola, who sat on the edge of the bed, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy but unwavering. He had listened to her confession about the book, its predictions, its warnings, its cruel control over her life. To her surprise, he hadn't laughed or doubted. He had simply reached for her hand. "Then we escape it," he said. "We escape all of this, the dynasty, the crowns, the noise. We write our own story." Her heart ached at the word "we." She had carried her battles alone for so long, but here was someone willing to share the weight. It was madness to dream of escape when Amara's claws and the Oyeniran family's expectations closed in tighter by the day. But love had always been rebellion in a world ruled by legacy. So they began to plan, quietly, carefully. Damilola whispered of homes far away, towns where no one cared for dynasty, where two people could live without a crown hovering like a noose. Omotara dreamed of mornings unmeasured by prophecy, of days where the only ink was the one she chose to spill in her notebooks. But the book was listening. That night, when she opened it, the pages were frantic, the handwriting jagged as though the quill itself trembled. The story cannot be rewritten. The story cannot be rewritten. The phrase repeated itself over and over, covering entire pages like the chant of a desperate priest. Omotara's chest tightened, but defiance surged hotter. "Then watch me," she whispered. She pulled a pen from her bag and pressed its tip to the cursed page. Her hand shook as she wrote slowly. "Tomorrow Damilola will tell me he loves me, and we will walk hand in hand through the gardens without fear." The ink sank into the page, glowing faintly before settling into silence. She closed the book, heart pounding like thunder in her ears. Morning came, and it happened. Damilola found her in the mansion gardens, his expression unguarded, his voice certain. "I love you," he said. Not in prophecy, not in warning, simply in truth. And when his fingers laced through hers, warmth spread through her chest, and for the first time she felt free. Omotara wept silently that night, clutching the book to her chest. She had changed the script. She had bent destiny to her will. Hope bloomed. She was not powerless after all, but hope came with a cost. The next morning she woke to find her mind thinner. Memories slipped like water through her fingers. She reached for her notebook to write about her childhood and froze. She could no longer remember the sound of her brother Abiola's laughter, the details of his face blurred, a painting smeared by careless hands. Panic struck. She flipped open the book. A new line had appeared. "The past is the price of freedom." Her hands trembled. Was this the exchange? Each word she wrote for tomorrow erased a memory from yesterday. If she tried to seize her future, her childhood would unravel piece by piece until nothing remained. The following days proved it true. When she wrote new instructions, small rebellions, tender dreams, they unfolded exactly as she desired, but in their place, her past hollowed out. The streets of Ibadan, where she once played, Sue blurred into faceless dust. The Akara stall smelled faintly in her mind, but her mother's laughter there, gone. It was like carving out parts of herself in exchange for freedom. At first she told herself it was worth it. Love was worth it. Escape was worth it. But when she looked at old photographs and felt nothing but blankness where memories should have bloomed, fear sank its teeth deep. One night, as she sat alone with the book, her candlelight flickering against the trembling ink, the page shifted again. The more you change the ending, the more you will lose yourself. The words glared at her, final and merciless. Omotara dropped the book, tears streaking down her cheeks. She had wanted to be free, but freedom was stripping her of her soul, and she realized with bone-deep dread she might win love, but lose herself entirely. The world inside Omotara's head was unraveling thread by thread. She could no longer recall her brother's exact smile. Was it wide and mischievous or soft and shy? The streets of Ibadan, once vivid in red dust and wooden kiosks, now blurred into muted sketches. She grasped for details that used to anchor her, but each attempt ended in a terrifying blankness. At first, she hid it. She forced her lips into smiles, deflected Damilola's questions with tired jokes. But he noticed. One evening, as they sat in the Oyeniran mansion's garden, fireflies flickering between palm trees, his eyes lingered too long on her empty stare. "Where did you go just now?" he asked softly. She blinked, startled. "Nowhere. You were looking straight at me, but it felt like you weren't here." His voice trembled with something rare for him. Fear. "Omotara, are you slipping away from me?" The dam broke. She pulled the book from her bag, thrusting it toward him as though throwing her sins into the fire. This is what's happening to me. It writes my life. It takes my memories when I try to fight it." Her voice cracked. "I'm losing myself, Damilola." He held the book with cautious reverence, as though he had expected its existence all along. His gaze hardened, and then, to her shock, he nodded. "I knew." Omotara's breath caught. "What do you mean, you knew?" "There have always been whispers," he said. "Every dynasty has shadows. My family's shadow was stories that lived longer than those who told them. My grandfather warned us. Some fates are written, some are stolen. I thought it was superstition. But when I met you, when things began happening too precisely..." He exhaled, his hands tightening around hers. "I knew the curse had returned." Instead of disbelief, there was grim acceptance. It broke her heart and healed it in the same moment. Together, they made a plan. If the vault beneath the library held shelves of unwritten fates, then perhaps destroying it would break the curse. Tear out the roots, and maybe the branches, her cursed book, would wither too. "It's the only way," Omotara insisted, her voice steel despite the tremor beneath it. "I can't keep losing myself. I'd rather risk everything than fade into nothing." But Amara was watching. She had seen too much, the glances, the touches, the unspoken bond, and now her suspicion solidified into venom. At a gala in Victoria Island, she pulled Omotara aside, her eyes glinting like polished glass. "You think he'll choose you? You think you can crawl from poverty into crowns without cost? I promise you, you will pay. And when you do, no one will remember your name." Omotara held her gaze, refusing to flinch. But later that night, the book offered its own chilling echo. When she opened it, new words bled across the page. "Burn one story, burn them all." Her chest constricted. It wasn't just about her. If she destroyed the vault, she wouldn't only erase her own curse, she might unravel the lives of every soul tied to those shelves. Thousands, maybe millions, whose books rested in that chamber. The stakes shifted, colossal and unbearable. What right did she have to risk everyone else's existence for her freedom? Yet what right did anyone have to imprison her inside ink? Damilola's jaw tightened when she told him. "Then we don't just burn," he said. "We find another way. We outwit it." His faith steadied her, but fear gnawed at the edges. That night, Omotara lay awake in her fellowship quarters, listening to Abuta's restless hum. The book sat on her desk, its cover faintly glowing in the dark, pulsing like a living thing. She whispered, "I will end you. I swear it." Sleep came late, heavy, uneasy. She dreamt of her grandmother's voice urging her to continue, of Amara's laughter echoing like broken glass, of Damilola's hand slipping from hers into smoke. She jerked awake just before dawn, her heart pounding. Her eyes darted to the desk. The book was gone. Her tote lay empty, papers scattered as though clawed through by unseen hands. Omotara's stomach dropped into ice. She scrambled to her feet, searching under the bed, the wardrobe, the desk, every corner of the room, nothing. The cursed book, her curse, her only tether to understanding this labyrinth, had vanished. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged. Somewhere in the shadows, the story was still being written. But now she no longer held the pen. The room felt hollow without it. Omotara tore through her quarters until the walls themselves seemed to mock her. The cursed book, her tormentor, her oracle, was gone. She clutched the tote against her chest, as though the fabric might confess where it had hidden. But the silence remained unbroken. When Damilola arrived, her hair tangled and her eyes frantic, she whispered, "It's gone." His expression hardened. "Amara." Omotara shook her head. "No, this feels different. The book, it's alive. What if it moved on its own?" He paced, fists clenched, his jaw tight. "Whether Amara or fate, it's dangerous, and now it's not in your hands." For the first time in weeks, Omotara breathed without the shadow of ink dictating her steps. Yet the relief was tangled with terror. Without the book, she had no predictions, no warnings. She was free and blind at once, a prisoner whose bars had vanished but whose captor still watched. Her first test came swiftly. At a society fundraiser, beneath chandeliers shaped like falling stars, Amara struck. In front of guests, she raised her glass and smiled with venom. "Have you all heard the story of our friend here?" Amara said, her voice sugar-laced. "A poor girl who claims to be tied to the Oyeniran dynasty. Such a fairy tale, isn't it? Fabricated, of course, but she tells it so beautifully." Laughter rippled like broken glass. Omotara's throat closed. Without the book, she had no warning, no shield. But then Damilola stepped forward, his voice slicing through the mockery. "Enough, Amara. She belongs here because I say she does." His hand slipped into Omotara's, public, undeniable. Gasps circled the room. The Oyeniran elders' faces turned to stone. In defending her, he had risked his place in the dynasty. Omotara's chest tightened, not only from gratitude but from fear. How much more could he lose because of her? Meanwhile, the earth itself seemed restless. Reports spread through a buha of tremors beneath the old library. The vault of unwritten fates was collapsing, as if rejecting human interference. Scholars whispered of dust pouring through cracks, of books glowing faintly before fading into ash. Omotara dreamed of the vault that night. In her vision, shelves fell one by one, leather covers scattering like leaves in a storm. And through the chaos, her grandmother appeared, eyes steady, her voice carrying across the noise. "The story must find its voice in you," she whispered. Omotara woke with tears on her cheeks. The meaning pressed heavy against her chest. If the book was gone, perhaps she was not meant to follow it anymore. Perhaps she was meant to become the author of her own story. But could she? Could she carve a path without ink dictating her every move? The suspense wound tighter with each hour. Every choice now felt like stepping into fog. She was no longer shackled by prophecy, but she had no net beneath her feet. At dawn, her phone buzzed. The librarian's name glowed across the screen. Omotara answered with shaking hands. "You must come," the librarian said urgently. "The book, it has reappeared." Omotara's breath caught. "Where?" "In the library. But child, it's changed. Half its pages are gone, blank, as if your story is erasing itself." The line went silent, but the weight of the words remained, pressing down on her like a second heartbeat. Her book was back. but it was hollow, wounded, and hungrier than ever. And Omotara knew whatever came next would decide not just her fate, but the very survival of her name. The library smelled of smoke and endings. Omotara stood in the hidden chamber once more, the cursed book trembling in her hands, its half-blank pages glowing with urgency. Shelves groaned as though alive, volumes rattling against one another, spines cracking in protest. The vault of unwritten fates was collapsing, and she knew time had run out. Before her stood the choice the book had always threatened: surrender to the script or burn it all. Her palms sweated as she turned to Damilola, his presence anchoring her in the storm. If I follow what's written, I'll survive, but I'll never be me. If I fight it, I'll lose everything I remember, my family, my childhood. Abiola. Her voice broke on her brother's name, already faint in her mind like a song half forgotten. Damilola stepped closer, cupping her face. You don't need memories to be real. You're here now. You're the woman I love, the woman who defied a dynasty, who refused to be erased. That's enough. And if you forget yourself tomorrow, I'll remind you every day until you believe it again. Tears blurred her vision. The book pulsed between them, ink dripping like blood from its edges. It wanted a decision. Omotara inhaled sharply, then with trembling hands, she uncapped her pen. If it insists on writing me, she whispered, then I'll write myself. Together, she and Damilola bent over the page. The words they carved were not prophecy, but rebellion. Omotara Bamidele lived by her own voice, not another's pen. The moment the sentence was complete, the book convulsed violently. Its spine cracked like thunder, pages curling in agony. A roar filled the chamber, as though the shelves themselves were screaming. Light burst from the book, pouring over Omotara and Damilola, searing and soft at once. She screamed, clutching it as the leather dissolved beneath her fingers, disintegrating into ash that scattered like feathers into the collapsing vault. Around them, other books flew open, their words rising like smoke, vanishing into the air. Names unchained themselves, destinies unbound. The vault was breaking, and with it, the prison of countless lives. Omotara fell to her knees, sobbing as fragments of her past peeled away. Abiola's voice faded completely. Her mother's laughter at the Akara stall slipped into silence. The smell of candlelight evenings, the taste of stolen suya, all dissolved like mist under sunlight. She clutched her chest, gasping. It's gone. I'm disappearing. Damilola knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. No, you're not disappearing. You're becoming. His lips pressed against her temple. I'll hold every piece of you you've lost. I'll be your memory when you can't remember. I'll be your anchor when the pages are blank. Her tears soaked his shirt, grief and relief clashing in her chest. She had lost so much, but for the first time, the future was not inked against her will. It was open, terrifying, free. The chamber around them caved inward, shelves crumbling, lanterns shattering, the sound a symphony of endings. Yet within the destruction, Omotara felt lighter, her chest no longer bound by words she did not choose. By the time the last shelf fell, the cursed book was gone entirely, reduced to nothing. All that remained was silence, thick and holy. They staggered into the dawn, the old library behind them trembling in ruins. Omotara wiped her face, the tears still falling, though she could not remember what had caused each one. She only knew she had chosen love, chosen freedom, chosen herself. She turned to Damilola, voice hoarse but steady. My story is mine now. He smiled, weary but resolute. and whatever chapters are missing, we'll write them together. She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of possibility. Her destiny was no longer bound in leather or ink. It lived in her choices, her voice, her love. The world stretched ahead, uncertain and vast. She no longer feared it. And in another city, miles away, a stranger wandered into a forgotten library, dust tickling their throat. Their hand brushed against a shelf of forgotten tomes until one spine caught their eye. A leather-bound book. They pulled it free, frowning as they read the title aloud. Their own name. The stranger gasped, their reflection caught in the book's faint glow. The cycle had begun again. The story was never truly finished. It was only waiting for its next reader. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't just stop here. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me, what would you do if you found your life written inside a book? Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because even bigger twists are coming in the next story. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it.